Hey everyone, welcome to session 267 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. Dr. Bruce Tinor returns to the show for an informative conversation about his work as a principal at Child and Career Development Center of Chester County, Pennsylvania. Longtime listeners will recall that Bruce originally joined me back in session 197, but in this podcast, we talk all things alternative ed. Specifically, Bruce gives a quick review of how students find their way to his school, and in doing so, provides a mini seminar of FAPE, or Free and Appropriate Public Education. And if you're not familiar with what that is, again, he goes through that very efficiently. We talk about working in multidisciplinary settings, how those related services are provided in the school. We talk about improving academic skills as a behavioral intervention on its own. And in general, what it's like to be a BCBA and a school principal. And boy, do I wish we had more of those. In many ways, this is a podcast about culture and leadership. Bruce talks about his interview practices and how he supports teachers and staff throughout the day. We also talk about some of the unique Tier 1 and Tier 2 behavioral practices, how he makes new students feel welcome at his school, his behavioral approach to social emotional learning, and lots more. We closed this podcast with what I thought was a really special discussion about Bruce and his position as a role model. I don't want to spoil that part of the show, so I really encourage you to listen to that section if you don't listen to anything else. Again, it's right at the very end of the show, so again, I hope you check that out. We're brought to you today by a returning sponsor, howtoaba.com. And their behavior resource membership saves you time, lends you support, and helps you keep up with your CEUs. It's a growing library of resources, materials, programs, data sheets, assessments, and how-to videos to help you tackle any ABA program with ease. There's lots more I could say, and we'll hear more from them later. But if you want to check out what they have to offer, go to howtoaba.com/join to learn more. And we're also brought to you by the New England Center for Children. Beyond thrilled to partner with one of the oldest and well-respected ABA institutions to help them find staff to continue their mission of supporting individuals with autism. Learn more about careers at NEC over at necc.org/jobs. And we are brought to you by ACE-approved CEUs from, well, you guessed it, Behavioral Observations. That's right. Get your CEUs while you're driving, walking the dog, doing the dishes, or whatever else you have going on, all while learning from your favorite podcast guests. And I will also note that I have put many more episodes up for continuing education. There's almost 60 of them right now. So go to behavioralobservations.com/get-CEUs to check out what's there. And last but not least, if the education scene is your beat, much like the discussion we had today, you're going to want to check out the behavioraltoolbox.com. It's a new education and training site that my colleagues Anika Costa and Dr. Polly Gavoni and I have been working on for a couple of years now. We have 2 courses available. Our first course, Ready, Set, Consult, and our newly released course, When Not to FBA, 5 Quick Strategies for Improving Behavior in Classrooms. So if you want to learn more, just go to thebehavioraltoolbox.com. All right, that's it for opening remarks. Without any further delay, please enjoy this very special conversation with a really great guy, Dr. Bruce Tinor.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Bruce Tinor, I am so psyched to talk to you. Good to see you again, man.
Thank you, Matt. It's good seeing you too, as always.
We had a chance to catch up a little bit at ABAI recently, and this podcast, like so many podcasts, I almost get sick of saying this, and I'm sure people get sick of hearing this, but this is one of those things that's been kind of a long time in the making. We talked about doing it last fall, right after Babbitt, because you gave a really great talk on all sorts of kind of like, at least what appeared to me, kind of like tier 2 and 3 type of school-wide interventions. And right after that, I gave my talk on, what is, kind of formulated the basis of the, When Not to FBA course that I put together with Anika Costa and Dr. Polly Gavoni. So it was kind of like a one-two punch, if you will, for those of us BCBAs in the public ed world. And so obviously I was digging all that you were talking about in your presentation. And I was like, I got to get this conversation on the air. So glad we finally got to do it, even though it was a couple of months later. So, listeners who've been listening to the show for a while will recall that you've already been on the show before. You came on with our mutual friend Merrill Winston a while back. But for those who may have missed that show or just the passage of time may not recall the details, can you give us a little bit of a backstory in terms of how you encountered the field and take us up to what you're doing right now?
All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you for inviting me to the show. I appreciate, big fan, and appreciate all the work you do in the platform you give people to share the wonderful things they're doing, for our science. And second, I will recommend that talk you gave at Babbitt was fantastic because I was, sitting right next to Dr. Heward. Your talk was wonderful. So I highly recommend.
Thank you, man.
It's the truth because it was kind of like sequential of how, the talk I gave and the talk you gave. I thought
it's almost like we planned it.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. So I'd highly recommend for those who may not have an opportunity to hear that talk, if you can share that, or it was a great talk. So
thanks, man. I really appreciate that. You know how to make the host look good, I guess. So, anyway, so let's hear a little bit about your background and what you're doing these days.
Yeah. So, I started off as a special education teacher. I taught early childhood, special education, taught kindergarten, early childhood, second grade, middle school, special education. I taught over 10 years. Decided to go into, school administration. I was kind of prompted by one of my professors to do it. Never thought I'd be in school administration. I just felt like the impact I would have in a classroom will suffice until I did my kind of your supervision hours, so to speak, in the principal realm, where you would, you need to meet your 360 hours. And then once I kind of got exposed to that and seeing kind of the more the impact you can make in the admin level, that kind of created an MO for me to go out there and now pursue being an administrator. So over the last, decade, I've, been a school administrator, did 4 years as an autistic support supervisor in Pennsylvania, then another 4 as a building principal for an emotional support of school in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. And then now currently accepted a new role. I just completed my official first year in Chester County for the Child and Career Development Center, where I'm a principal for approximately 350 students with special needs with all exceptionalities. So it's not just isolated to just autism, emotional disturbance, it's intellectual disabilities, students with other needs in the spectrum of special education disability category from kindergarten all the way up to 21. So you have a multitude of students with various needs. You name it, they're in our building currently right now. I'm the building principal, for that, or for the Chester County Intermediate Unit Organization. And our school is called, again, the Child and Career Development Center.
I see. And we were just talking before we hit record here. Yesterday was the last day of the 23-24 school year. So congrats on wrapping up that. What an accomplishment. And I know you're busy getting ready for extended school year and planning for the following year. And we can talk a little bit more about perhaps what those plans might be down the road here. But I want to learn more about the school itself. Just out of curiosity, where in Chester County are you guys?
Oh, in Pennsylvania, Chester County is southeast Pennsylvania. So you're kind of, I don't want to use the word border, but kind of closer to bordering to like the Delaware. It's outside of Philadelphia.
I see. Okay.
And everyone should know what Philly is because the majority of behavioralists around the world were just an ABAI. So,
good number of them for sure. Yeah.
So it was approximately probably like 45 minutes from the city of Philadelphia.
Got it. I spent some formative years in Delaware, so we would run up to Westchester and Kennett Square and some of that areas for kicks. So anyway,
that's it.
All right. So would this be considered kind of like an out of district placement for some students in the sending schools?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So tell me a little bit about how students find themselves in your school.
All right. So in the world of special education, obviously there's a whole process of a legal terminology is called child find, identifying students with special needs. By law, special education law, districts are responsible to do a child find, which is to identify and to ensure that students who may or may not be in special needs or special education, they do an evaluation. The evaluation dictates, do they need specially designed instruction or special education services? Once you identify with that, it's the school district's responsibility to provide level of supports within your school as least restrictive. Now, if students' behaviors or academic, or there's going to be some other deficiencies or deficits in their skill repertoire that the district cannot or are not able to meet, then they will look for an alternative placement. And the alternative placements by law, which districts are allowed to do if they're not able to meet those needs, to provide a level of service to meet the students' needs based on, we call it FAPE. It's an acronym for free, appropriate public education. Free to no cost to the district. Appropriate, meaning that it has to meet the needs of the student. And so free and appropriate public, obviously public is funded by the public sector, not a parent, not of the public, not out of the pockets or the expense of the parents, but student public. And it has to be for the education, obviously, too. So free and appropriate public education, which the acronyms for FAPE. And as long as they're providing that, even within the alternative schools, then they stay within legal compliance. So the alternative schools are kind of designed to really support students who needs exceed the supports that a school can provide. So then school's responsible now to provide them with choices for an alternative placement. And parents and the district, and at some cases, the student,
I think I lost you there. Sorry about that. We had a little internet hiccup there, folks. So you were in the middle of giving just a kind of like a quick masterclass on free and appropriate public education. I think you're about wrapping it up. So I apologize for the technical difficulties, folks. So we're gonna keep rolling here because that was a very concise rundown. So I think the audience has an idea of how people find their way to your school. I guess a follow-up question to that is that if you've got a kindergarten population, that seems to me, at least based on my experience as a public school consultant, those students would have to demonstrate quite considerable needs to go right from kindergarten, right, because most kids encounter public education from, at that level. I would imagine maybe these kids might have gotten flagged at the preschool level, perhaps as having needs so exceptional that the neighborhood school, if you will, could not provide them. Is that the case? Or I'm just curious what, because a lot of times I see this all throughout New Hampshire and Vermont. These kids will come into the schools at the kindergarten level, and it takes the team quite some time to kind of figure out what their needs are. A lot of kids will come in not having any type of special education identification. And for, on the one hand, it's good that they're in an inclusive environment, they're in their neighborhood schools and things like that. On the other hand, it's, you're fighting the clock, if you will, because you're spending a good chunk of that school year kind of sorting out what those kids' specific needs are and going through the special ed evaluation process. So with regard to the younger ones, is there like skewed distribution of I would say the intensity of their needs based off of that? Or is this maybe just a difference in, state approaches, I suppose?
Yeah, I would say depending on the state, every state's different. They have to fall within their legal requirements. But for students who are early learners who struggle, this question, I'm going to answer your question in a multitude of ways.
Sure.
If a student has not been identified under child find to have been assessed at all for any kind of special needs, and the student is significantly delayed or has significant problem behaviors, they're not able to just immediately just remove the student to another school. From a legal standpoint, an evaluation has to be conducted. Once the evaluation is conducted, which again, depending on states, some states are 60 calendar days, some are 90 school days, which can make the assessment very long. New Jersey can 90 days, Pennsylvania 60 calendar days. So there's going to be different type of laws within your own state reg. So that can alone extend the student, who within your own school district. So if the student is inside of your school and you do the evaluation and the determination that, yes, the student is eligible for special education, then the district, again, is required to look at internally to ensure, do they have an appropriate program for them to support? Some districts have self-contained classrooms. Within that, they'll trial out first. If some school districts may not have those resources, they don't have a self-contained emotional support, autistic support program. If they don't have that, and if they can't meet the needs of the student, then that's when they'll look for an alternate placement. Now, and then you may have kindergartners or first graders who will be referred out. Now, in a lot of states, you have early intervention. Early intervention, obviously, is part of the federal mandate under the Individual Disability Education Act, or IDEA. So states have that. However, in Pennsylvania, the intermediate units, that's kind of where I work. Believe it or not, students who receive early intervention services, kind of the intermediate units, are kind of like the school districts. Because when you're in early intervention, the school district are not responsible for early students in early childhood. Is when they get to school age, that's when they typically would be responsible for the students. Now, if you are a student, to answer your question in regards to how does a kindergartner or how does someone who's an early learner get to be in an alternative school? If the student is in an alternative placement or they're in an early intervention program and the needs are pretty high, such as they have extremely limited vocal repertoire, significant problem behaviors, and the school district who will be receiving the student, once the student turns eligible for school age, they will already know during the evaluation process when they transition. There's a transitional process where once you're, quote unquote, it's time to age out at a certain age for early intervention, used to be around 5 years old, they'll do the evaluation. The school district will already know at hand that they're able to support their student or they're not able to support the student based on what programs they have to offer. And then after that, that's when the decision would be made as the school district. Are we able to meet this child's need? Because if not, we should start the ball rolling now to put them in a place the child into a program to be successful. So if a student has significant problem behaviors or their vocal repertoires are very limited and they have other maybe medical needs or behavioral needs or significant other barriers, then they would refer out. And that's how you'll find a lot of maybe the kindergartners or the first graders, particularly our kindergartners, would be referred to an alternative school prior to them even going to the school, just knowing that they're not able to meet the needs. And it's kind of an agreement with the families. The families, for the most part, obviously the parents would be aware. And most of the time, if the parents are aware of the needs and they know the needs are excessive, then it'll be an agreement that place them in alternative school now and until the met, and then maybe annual IEP meetings. Legally, you have to have a minimum one. They can reevaluate every year to find out, is a child ready to be placed in a different program or back to a district.
Hi, I'm Shayna Gaunt.
And I'm Shira Carpel.
And together we created How to ABA. Are you an ABA professional looking to elevate your practice, connect with like-minded experts, and access top-notch resources? Do you love your work but struggle with feeling overwhelmed, under pressure, and in need of real support? We get it, and we've been there too.
As fellow BCBAs, we know how overwhelming it can be to take care of ourselves and the families we support. Introducing the Behavior Resource Membership, your ultimate resource for everything ABA. We created the Behavior Resource as a way to unite and support fellow ABA professionals so that you can feel confident in the work you love.
The Behavior Resource Membership will save you time. While most of your clients need individualized programming, you can still benefit from a template that gives you a great place to start. We offer you support with exclusive access to online community to collaborate with other ABA professionals. Members can also join the monthly live group mentorship sessions and upkeep your continuing education units or your CEUs, gain qualifying certificates for ACE, IBAO, and QABA upon completing some of our 60 plus on-demand recorded CEUs.
You'll get access to hundreds of program descriptions and instructions, data sheets, assessment tools, how-to videos, and materials to implement effective ABA programs for all your learners, saving you time and energy so you can focus on what's most important, the learners. Join thousands of ABA professionals who are already enhancing their skills and improving their client outcomes with the Behavior Resource Membership.
Ready to take your practice to the next level? Visit howtoaba.com/join and become a member today. Your journey to a better ABA practice starts here.
That's a perfect segue because I was curious I know it's your first year in this particular role, but do you have a sense of how many students you might return to their local schools based off of some sort of criteria, whether it's behavioral improvement, academic improvement, or needing fewer other types of adaptive supports or what have you?
Yeah. So in regards to, again, every approved private school or an alternative school, some are specialized for maybe the deaf and blind, or maybe some for other medical needs. But in regards to a lot of schools, many times alternative schools, districts will place students in alternative schools due to problem behaviors. The problem behaviors are as such that they're not able to be provided in that environment with 3, 4, 800 kids in a building. Therefore, a lot of times behavior. Therefore, you're looking at behavioral data and interventions to find out the behaviors that persist over time with the placement, the level of supports provided. Are we seeing a reduction or an extinction in the problem behaviors for an extensive period of time? And reviewing the data to find out, okay, is the problem behavior significantly reduced, where there's magnitude, frequency, and duration, where it may occur, but not with the same intensity, frequency, and duration, and under what conditions? And then also, is the problem behavior placed on extinction where we haven't seen that behavior? So annually, you look at it and you kind of look at a criteria over how long. Is it a month, 4 months, 5 months, the year, to make a decision at an IEP meeting to say, okay, this child hasn't engaged in these target behaviors over 5 consecutive months, and then you talk as a team to find out, is the child ready? Now, always caution that, again, a lot of times when students are successful, which is great, you got to look at a specialized program. You're going to have, probably be more behavior analysts. You're going to have, an admin who has, is a behavior analyst. You're going to have behavior analysts, strong principals, assistant principals with behavioral background. You have like a whole alternative schools. You're going to get much more support, which is great. So the question becomes, are we able to make sure, like, the behavior that is occurring and the replacement behavior, will it sustain over time? The way you do that is you kind of fade supports. Typically, if a student has a PCA or a personal care assistant or an RBT, are we able to look at fading supports within the alternative school, or maybe looking at a particular program that maybe not as restricted with that many staff to be placed within your own school, maybe to a different type of classroom or program, like emotional support. Maybe you go to a learner support with not as much staff. Are you able to be successful and thrive with less support in the same school, but with kind of less support? You still follow school rules and the procedures and the routines, with less support. Are you thriving in an environment with a little bit more kids and with less adults in the classroom, with less prompts? Are we a little bit more independent? So you're gauging all those elements to identify, is this student ready to be now discharged back into their home school? And that's the ultimate goal. And I caution, and I tell everyone, anybody who works or supervise or heads or owns a private school or an alternative school, the goal is obviously to return them back. Now, on a side note, least restrictive by the law, obviously the school district, I'm paraphrasing it, school district by law has to provide least restrictive environment, meaning the resources and interventions and the tools are given that's not as restrictive, it's least restrictive. However, for certain students, an alternative school may be least restrictive for them, because there's other facilities and there's residential facilities that are mostly restrictive, more restricted than alternative school. Because when you're in alternative school, you get to go home, you get to go, you still are able to go out there and participate in your local school district's activities, extracurricular activities. Those are still optional, but your school placement's different. However, if you go to a residential facility or you live in a residential facility, you don't get access to that. You're not living at home. You're living in a residential facility where you're being overseen by other folks. So that's more restrictive. And a lot of residential facilities do provide education, because legally you still have to, although you're in a residential facility, you still have to provide education. That's law across the board. So again, the goal is least restrictive into back to your neighboring school. However, for certain students, based on what they need, our environment is least restrictive for them, to where they would be successful, and the support they're getting may not be provided in their schools, so they get it here.
What kind of services do you guys provide at your school? It sounds like you support people with a diverse array of challenges, and I would imagine that requires a diverse array of services. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, in regards to the services you provide, I mean, we have obviously in every school, you have related services. You're going to have your physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, other related services. Obviously, every student receives transportation, offer transportation. You do have other, what they'll say is like if some folks need counseling, services as well too. We offer obviously ABA services to students. So if students are in need of a registered behavioral technician, that's an agreement between the intermediate unit as well as the school district on what type of programs to have. But also behavior analytic services as well too. School district will contract with us to provide behavior analytic services, registered behavioral technicians. So it's a multitude of services. We also provide for our teachers, obviously for the students is, looking at, we have a TAC department, a technical and consultation. So where we go out there and provide trainings and consultation for, our staff and to help support the students too. So obviously we provide curriculum, professional development for all of our staffing and for the districts. And we also provide, a multitude of services, even medical services like a nursing if they want to contract we have that. So I use very progressive and have a lot of services, and what the district need will be provided. If not, then we'll make it happen to provide the service for them.
Got it. So it sounds like there's a lot of need for interdisciplinary collaboration. So good stuff. I just think having a BCBA as a principal is just awesome. And I wish we could replicate that at scale. There's so many schools that would, be well served with that type of philosophy and behavioral approach and model. So with that in mind, when a student comes into your school, what is the first thing that they learn? Let's say you have, maybe it's not like a kindergartner who gets kind of, they're already in the pipeline through preschool, as you described earlier. But let's say someone arrives to the school, maybe they have, an emotional behavioral challenge or something else or what have you. What do you suppose the first thing that they're going to learn or notice that's different from the sending school, their neighborhood or local school?
Well, before I answer the question, I do want to make sure when you asked me the first question in regards to the school, when I say all exceptionalities, let me just give you I'm going to answer your question, a brief overview of the kind of programs we have. So we have
Sure.
Emotional support. We'll have K-8, or students whose their disability categories, emotional disturbance or emotional support program. We have autistic support, 7 classrooms, where you're going to have students who are non-vocal. So obviously, some has vocal skills. But a lot of students obviously have, limited repertoires and a lot of problem behaviors as well too. We also have life skills, which are students with intellectual disability. So that's a program. We also have multiple disabilities supports, where you'll typically students, non-ambulatory students who need medical equipment, and they're supported by nurses. You also have learning support, which is kind of a variation of emotional support, but that's kind of a nice program, because for students in emotional support, it's kind of a step down, because in our emotional support and autistic support, we have an RBT model supported by the behavior analyst, where you'll have in autistic support, we have 4 RBTs in the classroom. And in the emotional support, you have 3 RBTs in the classroom supported by the behavior analyst. So that's a nice little model to have as well too. But if someone in emotional support who's doing really well, it's an opportunity to see, all right, if we're looking for discharge, a good opportunity to see, okay, if they're ready to discharge, they can go back to school. But if their parents or district maybe have some questions, or the parents may be a little apprehensive, then we'll do a step down and just say, maybe put them in learning support, see how it operates, a little bit more students, less support, to see how they operate. And then when they're successful, now we definitely have enough evidence over time to say, this student's ready to go back. Thank you, but it's time definitely for you to return back to your school and integrate back to your community and your students in your community. So that's kind of an overview of the program. So again, and the reason why I bring that up is because just to clarify, for students who come into the program, now you're talking about students in emotional support. Obviously.
Yeah, let's go with that as an example. Sure.
Okay, right. So depending on where they came from, because school districts are the size of school districts and their programs are going to be different. depending on, the age of the students as well too. They're going to obviously understand the environment's going to be different. You're going to go into new students. The classroom size is going to be much smaller. You can have up to 12 students in a full-time emotional support classroom, where typically a lot of students are coming from classrooms with 30 kids, 27 kids. So just knowing that the classroom sizes are smaller and a little bit more support as well in the classes with the RBTs. So there's going to be much more support that are in the classroom. So that's kind of something that they can see as well too. Also too, I mean, with a lot of our students coming in there, the big thing is, when the parents come for tours, we always ask to bring the child, so we can kind of like, if that's going to be the case where the parents are agreeing to be placed on a placement, give them a tour, have them see the school, have them meet the potential new classroom teacher, potential peers in there, and kind of have a conversation, with the student, with the families, kind of going over our school. And then also when they get here, kind of going over expectations. So that the biggest thing is really going over school-wide expectations with them. So kind of know what the expectations are.
Let's dig into that. Tell me a little bit more about that. So let's say you have a kid who comes in who's like in the 4th or 5th grade or something like that. They've tried to make it work in their local school. The IEP team says, all right, this student needs more support. Let's send them to your school. And let's say they come in, they do the tour and things like that. When you sit down and go over the school expectations, what do those expectations consist of, and how do you communicate those with the incoming student?
Yeah. So I'll tell you something, what we're going to be doing, because my first year in our school, we're just going to revamp certain aspects. But I'll tell you what I've done at my old school, which we'll be implementing, in our new school, is when a student comes in, again, these are something we're going to put in place, but not only when you come in there, but just taking prior. If a student come in there, typically what I would have is, some of our students who's been in our program to give the students and the family a tour with myself. That way you build a relationship, you build a rapport, and the students who obviously exhibited an absence of problem behaviors for a sensitive period of time are able to take the other families and students on tour as well too, just to go out there and just show them the school, you're developing a relationship. And then from there, as we're giving the tour, a lot of times that I've done in the past was I would have the students pretty much go over who's been in that program, who is demonstrating signs of success by low problem behaviors or extinction, go over the rules with them, like right there, and explain to them the expectations that are in the classroom, showing them the classroom, pretty much transferring those skills right down to the students so they can go out there and be that. So it's a great way to build a sense of community, connection, have the other students, like they say, get a sense of pride, but also getting those students who potentially will be coming here in contact with some reinforcement, knowing that there's peers. It's not a quote unquote bad school, because that's part of the notion that they're probably hearing, that you're going to a bad school because you're being bad at your current school. So we're going to take you to a bad school. So kind of dispelling that notion that you're going to a bad school. So having that and building that capacity and building that rapport with the student, with other students in the classroom, has, in my experience, been very successful. That way they're aware, they're excited for the school, in regards to knowing that the potential classroom teacher or the potential classroom peers are present, engaging contacting them with reinforcement to make it more successful.
Hey everyone, are you looking for a meaningful career in autism education and behavior analysis? Then look no further than the New England Center for Children. The New England Center for Children is the country's leading autism school and research center. And for 50 years, they've helped transform the lives of children with autism. And they're currently hiring teachers and BCBAs in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont. NEC offers the industry's most competitive pay, professional development, and benefits package, including free graduate school. That's right, free graduate school. They also provide ongoing training for their staff, from annual refreshers to continuing education units for their professional certifications and licenses. Another great thing about NEC is that learning extends beyond their classroom walls. That's because the New England Center operates 14 residential homes and consults with more than 60 public school districts. NEC also operates a school in Abu Dhabi and clinics throughout the Middle East, and as such, teachers and staff have opportunities to work abroad. If this all sounds good to you, and you'd like to join the more than 500 teachers and BCBAs in making a difference in the lives of children with autism, Go to necc.org/jobs to learn more. That's nec.org/jobs. I have to imagine if you have a student who's not had success in their local school and they come into your school, do you see kind of like the light bulbs go off when they realize that they might have gone from a reactive model of discipline to one of positive reinforcement for maintaining expectations, kind of broadly speaking? Do you see a lot of kids who are like, oh my gosh, this is just, they might not verbalize this, but just from a behavioral perspective, almost as if they're saying this is a totally different type of relationship to school that I have.
Yeah, 50-50. It depends on the learning history of the learner. So for some of our students, yeah, they contact a lot of reinforcement, and you see, to your point, the light bulb goes off like, wow, like I didn't get this in my old school. These tickets and verbal praise and these opportunities for, opportunity to respond during, like, there's a lot of opportunities that I didn't have, which is allowing me to contact more reinforcement. This is great. And you really see a lot of students, some of our students, limited to no behaviors because of that, and particularly the younger ones too. But there are some students, because of their learning history, it's quite challenging because they had an extremely aversive experience at school. So when you come to this school, it's school is school. They're not generalizing that, they just, we're looking at stimulus generalization, right? Like we're talking about school. So no matter what school you give me, or I attend, if you say the word school, my shoes are coming off. I'm at that door. I'm flipping the desk. I don't care. I don't care all the contingencies that are in the environment. It's not going to maintain any kind of behavior at all. I'm out of here. So, those obviously has challenge due to, students who has a long history of significant problem behaviors due to some school aversion. So, or poor attendance. So they've been home a lot. So, you're home a lot. So you're reinforced being home, and you're not coming to school. So you don't even have a chance to really even contact reinforcement, because your home, which is the most competitive reinforcer, right, is the most potent, is home, video games, for being with your mom, your father, your family, not be exposed to other aversive stimuli. So just, it's challenging. So I would say depending on the learner, but yeah, there's situations where you just like, wow, these kids are lighting up and they just love school and they're so successful, and the families are just raving about their child's success, and we're already having conversations about going back, and like, not yet. My son's the first time my son's been successful in 3 years. He's staying, so like that's kind of the conundrum too, because you're like, you want to go back, but the parents are like, this is the first time you're not calling me for a phone call because my son cried or he was in the corner crying. You got to stay in that school. Like, we're good.
Hey everyone, as a BCBA, meeting your continuing ed needs can be challenging at times. That's why I have made selected episodes of the Behavioral Observations podcast available for Type 2 continuing education credits. That's right. You can meet a portion of your professional development requirements on the go. Currently, we have CEs for topics including functional assessment, ethics, and supervision. Come learn from podcast favorites such as Greg Hanley, Pat Fryman, Mark Dixon, as well as many other amazing guests. For more information, head on over to behavioralobservations.com/get-CEs. All right, so I know a lot of people are probably waiting for us to get to this, so let's get to it. So what are some of these kind of both, I guess, universal and perhaps some more targeted interventions that you practice at your location? And maybe feel free to speak broadly and relate some of the information that you shared with the folks at Babbitt that you were talking about at your previous school, in terms of, so anyway, you can take it in any direction you want, as a matter of fact.
So before we start, analyzing the first year, there's a lot of wonderful things and practices in the school, but one of the things that we hyper focus on, and by the way, I have a great and amazing team here in the CCIU for the Chester County Intermediate Unit, and also the Child and Career Development Center. We have a great staff, dedicated staff, hardworking staff. They put everything on the line every day for these kids. So I appreciate them. And, we kind of remodeled some of our teams, and we created a MTSS framework for our school. So one of the things, and we're in the process of, like I said, just refining it and to make it ironclad as we roll into the next year. But an important thing, working in alternative schools for almost a decade, you still have the fundamental concepts of the MTSS framework. You got to have your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. But if you're going to be in a school with hundreds upon hundreds of special needs students, with the majority of them, if not all, with significant problem behaviors, you have to be well equipped to have a system to really support them. Because in theory, you have to give a child if a child's behaviors exceeds the school, you got to find alternative placement. But logically, you're thinking, wait a minute, if this child struggled with social cues and social, some social behaviors or, maladaptive behaviors in this school, and child number 2 and child number 300 and child 350 all have the same issues, you're putting them under one roof? That doesn't make any sense. Right?
I know.
So the question is, what can we do from a behavior analytic approach and using the principles to really set the foundations to really support these students? And it can be done, because I've done it in my prior school, and we're going to be doing it now in this school, and it can be done just based on the evidence. So the first thing, when you're talking about a tier 1 practice, you have to have certain fundamental concepts of just when you're talking about tier 1, this is just like the must-haves. This is non-negotiables. These are the elements in your classroom, in your school, within your classrooms, that has to occur in order for you to be successful within the context of your classroom and within the whole school. So we talk about tier 1 practice. And again, it must become common language to a lot of folks who may be aware of the MTSS model, but you have to think like you're dealing with every student who has an IEP and every student that has problem behaviors. Like, you're not coming to the school without some level of problem behaviors or some other limitations that may occur. So when we talk about tier 1, you're looking at obviously one common theme, common language, a culture. It's cultural. Like, this is like what we do. And that's what culture is. Just like an easy way to think about it is, this is how we do things here. Obviously, it has to be ethical and meet the standards, but that is how we do. So when you go into your language about, ours to be safe, be responsible, be respectful, what does that really mean? What does that mean for the school? What does that mean for your classroom? So when you're looking at classrooms for tier 1 practices, before you say this child's struggling, because we know why he's here or she's here. She's like, the reasons why they're with us, we know why. Like, that's not a secret. We had the IP meeting, we discussed it, we did the referral, we know why they're here. So in order for you to reduce significant problem behaviors, some key elements for tier 1. First of all, your physical layout. Obviously, your layout has to be very clear. Have movement without disrupting others, making sure the classroom is highly organized and easy accessible for the teachers, and for certain students, for your students, accessible materials for them as well too. Now, I would refrain from exposing them to too many reinforcers. You can't have that. Reinforcement should be shielded, kept away, so that way they can man a request for reinforcement, or you're delivering the reinforcement. That way they can contact reinforcement contingent upon you, which is pairing, and also you delivering reinforcement. So be very cautious of that. Not having skills in your snacks and your technology free, where the kids just grab and go. No, it's going to have to really be structured where you're delivering reinforcement, but it has to be a physical layout. Also, classroom rules, making sure things are posted. Like, you have to have rules, like rule govern behaviors and also contingency shape, but like rule govern, like, what are the rules? Is your rules posted? And as your behavioral expectations, are they corresponding with your school matrix? Does it exist, and is it appropriate? That's what you have to look at as well too. Those are very critical things when you're looking at like expectations for your rules in your classroom. Also too, we're looking at your routines. You have to have a set of routine. Like, what are your behavioral routines that are very specific, clearly stated, and developmentally appropriate, using some kind of classroom matrix. So when the students walk in, they got to know what to do. It just can't be, I do what I want to do, and I put my bag on the floor. One kid put on the hook. One kid places his book bag on the back of the chair. No, this is what we're doing. It's got to be a clear routine. They know what to grab. They know what to sit. And all students, they should be able to go out there and clearly demonstrate or clearly state what the routines that they are. So if Matt, you walk into a classroom, the goal is, hey, what are you doing now? Oh, 8:20 to 8:40, we're eating breakfast, and then we throw our stuff away, and then we grab the kindergartners, let's just say. We'll grab a Lego, play with that for 10 minutes, to transition, the bell hits, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, the bell hits, I put it away, we get ready for our morning, like it's morning meeting. There you go. It's already stated. So that's something we look at too, for like a clear classroom routine. Now, another thing, a big area that's a lot of problem behaviors is transitions,
Mm.
right? Your transitions. When you're looking at transition, obviously they're going to be prompted, some kind of stimulus within the environment prompted. It could be a cue or it could be some kind of signal, right? But like a pre-corrective statement specifying the behavioral expectations. So making sure that the majority of the students, like we'll say maybe you have 12 kids. The goal is like every kid do it, but we know there's some outliers who may not. New student, maybe one student, maybe have, other things may have occurred to some problem behaviors, but you're looking at the core of your students are able to transition and be prompted when your signal goes to go and transition from a preferred to a non-preferred.
So let me jump in here real quick, Bruce, because in your Babbitt talk, you showed this awesome video of this teacher just so skillfully getting her class ready to go outside to recess. And maybe to folks who haven't worked in public schools, that might not, what's the big deal, and it is a big deal. I'll let you, tell us why. But more importantly, I want to hear you describe the process the teacher went through. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah. Actually, believe it or not, that was a paraprofessional.
Okay.
Yeah. So even better. So
even better. Yeah. Perfect.
Better. So we had a paraprofessional at my former school at the Early Learning Academy, where I was a principal for an emotional support elementary program. Obviously, transition was an issue. You're going from a preferred to non-preferred. Well, how do we do that? One of the things in instructional methodology is co-responding. So we use that way. Everyone's engaged, everyone's actively responding, and everyone's hearing the cue. So we did a lot of staff training on that and really modeled for them how it looks. And it's very important that they all have buy-in on what the expectations are. So in the video, obviously, after a lot of training, I wanted to record unprompted, like I was just recording. I mean, she saw me record, but the students, I was right behind them, so they weren't kind of aware, but watching the way we do it every single day, transitioning to every single area of the classroom. But we made sure we had our rules. It was at the time was raw, respect, ownership, attitude, responsibility, and they went over that. So it was a co-responding is, obviously it's like kind of more kind of like an intro. So what you're saying is you're saying some kind of phrase and they do kind of a fill in too. Like you keep your hands and feet to yourself and they'll say it and then they'll read the rules with you. And then you give a prompt and a signal, you point or you snap or you clap and then they'll fill in the blank or they'll say the response. And they did it to transition to make sure everyone was responsive, everyone answered, everyone was clear on the rules and everyone lined up appropriately. And that obviously takes a lot of practice, a lot. But when you do it, you reduce so many issues. Lining up can be a significant issue. Kids pushing each other, they don't know where to line up. There's a fight. You're breaking the kids up. And we got, kindergartens, first graders throwing fights. You're splitting half the class in half. Those behaviors can be significantly reduced if you have a smooth transitional cue or routine that can eliminate those problem behaviors and obviously allow for reinforcement.
And what's cool about that is that it doesn't rely on the students just trying to intuit how those transitions should go. In other words, that the process is actively modeled and taught, and kids get feedback, or at least that's the way it looked to me, and that's the way I've seen people do it. Believe me, I've seen a gazillion non-examples of that as well. Yeah. I've been in some schools recently where, it's we're recording this on June 11th. And, I was in a school last week where I was observing during a library class and the teachers reading a book to a third grade class on, first week of June. And she's still redirecting problem behavior at the carpet and stuff like that, whereas if you have a scenario where, the carpet expectations are explicitly taught down to the last detail, starting, day one of school, that feedback probably becomes less necessary as the year goes on. The redirection, that is.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Matt, because I want to make sure I'm clear. What we're talking about is students with severe problem behaviors. No one's going to be exempt from problem behaviors in a school, like an alternative school, because there's so many variables that you can't, many folks are not going to be able to control for. A lot of things can occur prior or after or during a situation that can so you're looking at creating a system that the students are just aware. Now, again, even if you look at in a public school, they'll tell you 80% of the students should be able to contact, tier one. There's going to be outliers. In a public school where, depending on the size of your school, regardless of that, they're looking at 80%. So they're still accounting for 20%. In an alternative school, you might get 20 or even more, 25, 30. So we're not saying it's going to exempt problem behaviors, but you are going to increase or decrease maladaptive behaviors and increase the rate of responding, and obviously allowing for a classroom to run with more efficiency.
Regardless of your title, if you are a behavior consultant who is working in or with schools and you are struggling and wondering why your interventions are not producing the desired results, you are not alone. Unfortunately, those tasked with improving behavior in schools are too often left to carry the burden by themselves. You are the behavior person, so you take care of it, is the unsaid mantra. But you can't improve behavior and the associated outcomes by yourself. In fact, creating sustainable improvement in student behavior almost always requires changes in the performance of the educators. I'm Dr. Pauly, and along with my colleagues Anika Costa and Matt Sikoria, we are designing coursework called the Behavioral Toolbox. In it, you will be taught strategies grounded in organizational behavior management for consulting in schools in a way that brings out the best in educators so they can bring out the best in the students they serve. If this sounds exciting, be sure to click on the link in the description to sign up for more information.
How do you onboard staff? I think of this, in so many levels, but from a leadership level, when you're hiring new staff, let's say you have a new teacher, a new paraprofessional, a new related service provider who may not necessarily come from a background that is behavior analytic in nature. What has your experience been in terms of, onboarding them, getting them up to speed with the philosophy, et cetera, et cetera? Can you talk a little bit about it from that angle?
Absolutely. I'm going to answer this question twofold. One, what was done in my experience in the past and currently, what will happen, and kind of give you a perspective on. So it is obviously when you sign up to be in an alternative school, you're really not equipped, or no one really goes over what you're going to be walking into. They just think it's school. They see little elementary students and they just think, I can take the job. It's a job. And yeah, I like kids. I had a niece and nephew that I used to watch who was a little wild, but I can take care of that. When you walk into a situation, you're like, whoa, I was expecting this. So in my experience as an administrator, I've seen that. I've seen people walk into a hornet's nest and they were ill-equipped to handle these behaviors, or they were certified, but they weren't qualified. So what do? So in my past, what I've done is, and again, in a smaller program, it's easier to have a handle on these things because you can have a little bit more time. And depending on like your time and depending on your setup, allowing folks like your behavior analyst or myself or others to really help support and create a kind of an onboarding where they're going over the token economy system, going over your tier one practices, and then going over, the system as a whole and how to deliver reinforcement, your scheduled reinforcement for the student or the students that you're working with, and kind of taking a lot of time, an hour, 2 or 3, to kind of go over the process. One of the things that I've done in the past too, when I would do interviews, I used to interview individuals for the position and they would quit within a week. Now think of all the resources that you allocate for training, onboarding, the training that you just wasted. So now anyone who wants a position, in the past, when I interviewed folks, you had to interview in the school. So I would interview you. And my interview was a walking interview. I would never sit with them. I'd walk. We couldn't walk and talk. I'll answer the questions, but I want to see how you see the classroom. Before we go any further, is this even a good fit for you? Ask me the questions of what you're observing. I'll ask you some questions. I already have your resume, so I don't need to ask you where you're from. I don't have to ask you where you worked. I already read it. I need to know, is this environment something that you can operate under, looking at the flow? And that has significantly assisted us in moving forward with folks understanding what they're walking into, seeing the environment, and seeing how the students interact with the staff interaction with the peers, how some problem behaviors occur, how it's handled. So they kind of get an idea of what they're walking into, what kind of classroom they're walking into. And they say, hey, I'm interested, but maybe not the older students, maybe the younger, or vice versa. So those practices that I've implemented in the past were very successful. Let me just come in here and just see it. Well, let's talk casual interview, and then let me know if you want to be here or not. Because if you don't, thank you very much. It was an opportunity to pop in the classroom and talk to you and showcase what we do, and you can move on. Or if there's something you want to do, let's rock on and let's go to the next steps and get a little more, go over a little bit more detail about the program, expectations of the staff, and go from there. But also, too, another thing, when you have strong staff and strong teachers and strong paraprofessionals and RBTs in the classroom, that is another way to help support the new folks who are coming in there too. Because when you have a good system and they see it in practice, the staff will also help the new staff or the RBT in that setting, explaining to them more in detail of how the flow of the classroom works, how the system works. And believe it or not, if you really have a strong class and the students are doing very well, the students will help out too. They'll know the schedule better than some of the staff, believe it or not.
I believe it.
Do. I've seen it firsthand daily for years for certain students who can pretty much operate the class and know where to go and know when to hit the timer, when to stop the timer, when to rotate. I mean, they have when you have a strong system, it is one of the most beautiful thing to watch, because I've seen it. 10, 12, 8, 9 students who were referred here with significant problem behaviors are flowing within the system, doing so well, helping support new staff with the system. That can help really ease staff in there too. But that's something that's been, in my experience, very helpful. And those are kind of practices that obviously we're going to explore to also implement as well too. Just kind of reducing, to help support staff retention and not worry about folks you train, allocate so much resources and time to for them to leave because they weren't equipped for that. So examining that as well too.
I'm glad you mentioned the word retention, because I was just going to ask a question about that, because I'm wondering, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or not, but I have to imagine for those staff who, let's say they decide, yes, this is a fit for me, and they are working within the culture that you guys are crafting, if you will. I have to imagine going back to a local, quote unquote, regular public school probably is pretty scary and aversive for that. In other words, but what I'm trying to say here is I imagine that, beyond the first pass where people might, work, a couple of months and say, oh, this isn't for me. If you get beyond that, you probably have some staff, I would imagine, who thrive in that structure, if you will, meaning that there are consistent, cultural expectations and behavioral expectations of the school and those expectations aren't available elsewhere, and schools may be more chaotic as a result elsewhere. Therefore, your setting or settings like these might be a more preferred work environment, because even though there might be a level of behavioral disruption by virtue of the population that you serve, there's a process for helping these individuals and managing and things like that. Do you see that? In other words, do you have teachers and staff who are like, there's no way I'd ever work in any other, local public school?
Oh, absolutely. There's staff here for over 2 decades. They just love the population with special needs, and they would feel out of sorts going to a gen ed school.
Yeah, that's the point I'm curious about. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we have a lot of staff who really adore being in this environment with the type of students that we have. Absolutely. No question about it. There's been many staff here. I took over for the principal prior, Dr. Sue Matika. She was here for 37 years. I think, since 86. I believe that was the year. Yeah, it was like 37 years. But I think 10 as a teacher, and the next 27 as the principal. But you had a lot of staff from the 80s and the 90s and early 2000s who stayed to 20, 30 something years in an environment like this. They love it, and they wouldn't want to operate in any other environment. So, yeah.
That's remarkable. That is super cool. I want to turn the page here to academic skill deficits. So one of the things I found these things kind of really hard to tease apart, especially with kids with, emotional behavioral challenges, and that their problem behavior takes them away from learning, so much so that they're, somewhat curriculum deprived, and yet they still matriculate on through the grades. Next thing you know, you've got a 6th grader who, doesn't know basic math facts and they're trying to do long division. So it's a wicked pet peeve of mine. I talked a little bit about it in the talk that you mentioned earlier. And obviously that, I would imagine that you guys see some of that, or maybe a lot of it. I don't know. Do you see, so I guess I'm curious more generally, what is your approach to skill remediation? And do you see that alone? Obviously, it's hard to do the exact, the perfect experiment because you get a lot of interventions going simultaneously. But do you have a sense that, if you are able to move the needle academically, does that alone or not, or is that in concert with other interventions help with problem behavior?
Yes, I'm happy you said that. Your last section about the intervention of problem behavior. So before we start, it's very unfortunate. And I'm speaking in general, not this building, not my path. I'm just speaking in general, my experience over 20 years in public education in general too.
Sure.
It's the unawareness of skill development and skill acquisition for students. Just because you're in the 5th grade doesn't mean you're doing this particular content. I think for the most part, I understand there's some guidelines in regards to age appropriateness of skills, but people have to be very aware of skill repertoire. Because listen, a lot of you're in school, so the majority of functions of problem behavior is escape maintained, right? You had a bad experience in your school, hence the reason why you're in this school, and you got to be, or in alternative school, not in general, just in alternative school, and you got to be cautious of giving them the same kind of content that was, produce the same kind of response due to an aversive stimulus that allowed for problem behaviors to occur. So we have to be aware of that too. But to answer your question about academics, before we get into academics, which is very the reason why it's by law you have to be governed to see academic progress as well too. But before, and this is part of when I talk about practices, your tier 1 practices, these things go unnoticed. Looking at someone's score, whether it's going to be the academic score, when you're doing a reevaluation, some kind of testing, or you're doing probes or benchmarks, those are really important things. It's a gauge to finally making progress. So it's really amazing data. But within the teaching trials, we have to make sure before any academic begins, we have to make sure we're very clear on the type of academic objectives that's being offered for the student by utilizing some kind of signal to garner a child's attention before you begin a lesson. These are very important and critical. I mean, if all this talk, I want this to be the emphasis. We have to make sure that the staff and who's working with the learner, you're establishing instructional control. You're making sure you're gaining the student's attention, going over the rules before you even start, going over how to contact reinforcement, the contingencies to get reinforcement, any kind of rule governance. Just you got to go over all these important things to set the stage of specifically what are you able to contact during the instructional lesson. Are you contacting reinforcement? And towards the end of this lesson, is reinforcement, being offered some level of reinforcement, or a reinforcer rather being offered as well too. So, making sure you have an academic objective prior to the task, be very clear expectations, and all the students make sure they're ready. So if it's young elementary kids, if it's going to be hand on the table, ready hands, feet on the floor, start it up, go over expectations, provide reinforcement. Another thing too is the pacing of your instruction. Far too long, and I'm a special education individual. My whole career was a special education as a teacher before I got into behavior analysis. But being aware that starting it in special education, you always taught, even when I was an undergrad, someone is, in special needs, you take your time, you go slow, just like as much time as you need, which is all true. You want to give someone time. But honestly, the literature supports that, even when you're doing discrete trial training, that's kind of the antithesis of what we're supposed to do. The pacing instruction should be faster, quicker, and contact reinforcement more frequently. You shouldn't be taking so time because
absolutely
you're reducing skill acquisition. The faster and the more efficient you are, the quicker you acquire a skill, you go to the next skill, and making sure you do maintenance on the skill. If you have a learner that, they say the word, I'm going to use the word retention loosely, but you want to acquire skills. So making sure you're providing opportunities for to respond, within a time frame, looking for whether it's individual or groups of students, making sure you're providing an opportunity to respond, and also to making, there's going to be some wait time as well too. But that's when you go into some kind of also errorless teaching and error correction procedure as well too. So utilizing errorless teaching or error correction procedures within your pace of instruction to make sure gaps of filling in information or errors are being made, it's immediately corrected and you're going on there and go through your procedure. And then you're looking for accuracy too. Like when you're teaching, you're looking for accuracy and not just sitting doing probes. I'm not talking about probing. Probing is testing. We want to test what you've learned. Too many folks in my experience, and this is over years upon years of just working. I worked in a district for over a decade. I've worked with districts as an administrator for over a decade. So I understand self-center based as a principal, supervisor, special ed, ran the whole gamut. You're looking at the probes. The probes are great because it just tells you what you're teaching or how your teaching is working or not. But what we're looking for is, are we increasing student accuracy during the teaching sessions? Because you get the baseline data, and then when you provide with the opportunities, are you able to correctly answer the questions with the proficiency for a number of percentage? You're looking at the materials being age appropriate but challenging at the same time, and also making sure for student accuracy, corrective feedback is giving immediately, not later, immediately, whether it's telling, showing, or demonstrating the correct answer as well too, to build someone's accuracy during the teaching trials. I think that's where sometimes we in education get lost for our severe population. Is you got to look at not the probes, you got to look at the teaching trials, because the teaching trials the instructional trials are going to be the opportunity to acquire that skill or master that skill. The probe is just showing that it's working. I'm probing you once a week, once a month, whatever the benchmark timelines are. But when you're teaching, you got to make sure academic objectives are clear, concise. Your pacing of instruction allow for the acquisition of skill, and your student accuracy. How accurate are they hitting that? How quickly are they hitting that till we go to the next one?
Preaching to the choir. So I love it. Good stuff. Yeah. And it's such a key. So key to, if you can get a kid who goes from, low fluency with their letter sounds or math facts or whatever to a high level of speed with those repertoires, it just makes everything else so much easier. And it's an opportunity to reduce the aversive nature of the schoolwork and thereby reduce perhaps some acting out that may be escape or avoidance motivated. So.
Yeah, and not only obviously you're giving, verbal praise, social contact, high five, fist bumps, maybe edible, but think about when I'm speaking to this, I'm not speaking just to the emotional support or students with higher verbal repertoire. I'm speaking for students who are nonverbal too. The principles are the same. So I understand that some students may not be vocal, but when you're working a discrete trial training or intensive trial teaching, those principles are the same too. You're looking at, the pacing of instruction, you're looking at objectives, your accuracy, your engagement, all that is the same. So I don't want to exclude my autistic support, staff and students, or our students with multiple disabilities, life skills.
That's an awesome point. Dr. Carrie Millica, who's been on the podcast a couple of years ago, she sent me a video she did once of so if you think of the typical discrete trial lesson, it's sets of 10 and there's no real time bound nature of it. And then she sent me a video of doing, I think it was a matching or some sort. It's been forever since I've seen it. I should try to dig it up somewhere. Wasn't X number of correct trials per 10. It was how many correct or incorrect in like a 30-second, session, if you will. And I think the number of student responses during that 30 seconds was multiples of 10. So it was just more opportunities, more engagement, more trials where a student can, have the opportunity to emit the correct response and receive reinforcement or receive some sort of error correction if they did it incorrectly. And seeing that is just like a light bulb. So I'm so glad you broaden the scope of this discussion to include that population and that type of teaching technique.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And that was well said. And I think for me, working with every population, every age level in special education. I guess for me, it's when we talk about disseminating the science, I am not excluding any population. I'm including others into that too. She's just saying, do not limit this science to just a population or two, or age, or a particular set of students, with high school, elementary. The procedures are the procedures, and the science is with the science. So you can still, now it may look different for certain populations. Your delivery or some of your responses or your techniques may be slightly different contingent upon the population, but it's still the same.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I want to move to some somewhat related topics here. What, the term social emotional learning, if anyone's in public education, you can't get away from it. It's a very popular kind of buzzword, and it means different things to different people. Is this something that you guys have dug into at your school? If so, how do you conceptualize it? And yeah, just tell me a little bit about, if you guys have a specific approach to this, what that looks like.
Yeah, for social emotional, I mean, that terminology has been out for a while. SEL, social emotional learning. It's kind of like the use of like a variety of like approaches and skills, kind of to meet the needs of a student, who has, obviously, that's more geared towards students kind of with emotional disturbance or emotional support, or students with higher verbal repertoires who has, the skills of, higher level of intraverbal and higher language order. That kind of terminology is kind of used, for that as well too. Now, in regards to that, there are components of like social emotional that, you look for. You're looking for kind of interventions, that can be conducted for, for that. So when you're thinking about social emotional learning, think about group of students who has a verbal repertoire that are able to engage in this language, this back and forth as a speaker and a learner, that they can engage in conversation. So if students are struggling with some social aspects of peer conflict and other aspects too, you're looking at establishing these, what they call social skills, or social, boundaries of social skills, so to speak. So what are the deficits in social skills, where it can be whether social cues, someone's not getting some kind of prompt, or maybe a social interaction that has been, unfortunately, someone had a past learning history of social conflict with other peers. If they're not able to access reinforcer, or they want to escape an environment, instead of requesting or demanding for a break, they'll strike a peer, or they'll say something inappropriate to a peer. So you're looking at the social, quote unquote, social emotional. When they use the word emotional, it's kind of, I'm going to just define it. It doesn't say, but I'm going to define it for the folks, for the viewers. It's when they say social, obviously the interaction between others, and emotional, it's like your response, your aversive response to a stimulus, right? So if something's presented to you that's aversive, your reaction can be maladaptive to the point where it could be dangerous, where you could scream at someone, verbal aggression, cursing at someone, threatening someone to hurt them, shoot them, kill them, which has been said. Also could provide physical harms, just property destruction, or aggressive tone towards someone if some type of, based on the function, reinforcement hasn't been delivered, or escape in aversive. So they're looking at those aspects. Again, student to student, student to adult interactions. They look at everything. So you're looking at how to incorporate student feedback in the future. Looking at how to adapt a lesson to provide more of a positive classroom or behavioral system. Kind of addressing looking at social emotional programs and services, including types of interventions. Now, I will say this too: some of the interventions that you'll see in public schools, or are a lot of them are not grounded in behavior analysis. Now, they may use certain, I don't want to say behavior analytic principles, but some terminology that sounds behavior analytic, but it's not. However, I challenge the behavior analyst, if you are working in a school that has that, definitely, looking at these areas, such as, like they'll say, so conflict resolution, restorative practices, perception or perspective taking, social awareness strategies, pragmatic language skills. Like these are terminologies that are used in a social emotional that they kind of use, and schools buy all these curriculums to address it. But I always, and we're still working on it as we speak now, looking for a social skills curriculum that's grounded in behavior analysis or has elements of it to help support. So they try to look at what can we do in the school to really help support students that has these social deficits, these emotional deficits, and what are some of the interventions we can do to do that. So that's kind of how in schools they try to examine that and look at those areas to see what they can do for the learner to help support.
So just to clarify, what you guys are doing in your school is that you're trying to, like, if kids are having, you're basically addressing the specific social skill deficits from a behavior analytic framework.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So, yeah, 100%. So I would just give you the overview, but from our end, we're still in the process of, examining a curriculum, that can be driven with data, that has some kind of sequential skills that we can just target certain behaviors, that we can kind of address it in a behavior analytic approach. And honestly, like, that's the biggest thing too, and I don't want to get into RTF, but there's a lot of information out there that kind of use mentalistic terminology. However, my approach is for behavior analysts who are working in the homes or in schools or working with schools with clients, irregardless of what it's called or what they want to call. You don't want to get into like the semantics, as long as you're supporting the learner and your interventions are grounded and based on the interventions or the principles of applied behavioral analysis. That's what kind of matters. So, we were having this dialogue about this, recently. You want to talk about a conflict resolution. Like, okay, what does that look like? What's the conflict? Operationally define what conflict means, talk about it, and what are the steps and the interventions grounded in behavior analytic principles to address conflict resolution, to address social awareness. Again, you operationally define it, come up with some set of interventions to address it, collect data on it, and ensuring that the skills are going to be able to go and teach the generalization, so to speak, to making sure that it can generalize across different people and environments.
Got it. Do you guys do parent training, or do you have a plan to do some parent outreach? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's something that I have plans on.
It's in the master plan.
In the master, I have a huge
long range plan.
Long range plan.
All right. We'll come back to that one once you have that. It's an area I've been trying to dig into a little bit more myself, just because some of these repertoires, unfortunately start in the home setting and then they come into school, and so we only have the kids for a fraction of the day. So I know I'm preaching.
When I have it all set up and ready, I would love to come back and share that and talk about that, because the plan I had and the plan, when I was a teacher in New Jersey, we helped support and created a parent special education advisory board, like a committee, and to go over that too, which is great. When I used to work at Colonial Intermediate Unit, almost 10 years ago, we created family engagement, for initiative, where we had families come down there in the evenings. We met with them quarterly, and we presented to the families. Start off as a presentation to get more, helping them out and assisting them with understanding, because I supervise autistic support. So a lot of our students obviously had significant limited skills. So whether, my partner was a speech and language pathologist, a supervisor, an expert in AAC devices. So we do training on that, a functional behavioral assessment. We had a lot of folks go out there in our initiative and that really helped out and build a rapport with the families as well too. And it kind of, then I left, but it kind of continued, and it grew when it meeting periodically and going over supports too. It kind of became more of a supports group too, because it's challenging when you're raising children with needs. First of all, it's challenging, obviously, being married and having children just in general. It's just because you're responsible for so many different contingencies, let alone if you have a child with needs or require more support, that's challenging. So having that as a support group is great as well too. But that's coming up in the pipeline to have a massive plan for that to really help out.
Okay, awesome. I have got a couple leadership questions for you. I know we've kind of touched on that earlier, and I want to come back to it. So how much time do you allocate towards working directly with teachers, whether that's observing or coaching them directly. What is your personal interaction, I guess, cycle like? As you've got 300 kids, you've got a lot of different, the needs are quite diverse, ages are quite diverse, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you manage to have enough contact time with folks to know what's going on?
Yeah. Well, that I would say, in previous placement, because we were smaller, that question was an easy question because we were small enough that I can pop in to classes and get FaceTime for a significant amount of time, within the classroom. But, in your first year in a new building, trying to learn the processes, the environment, we have almost 50 classes. So you can't get every class all day. It's almost impossible. I mean, you could make it a point to do that, but again, you'll be out of your office, I'm not in my office much anyway. So what I've done is, pop into classes periodically, but also spending time in classrooms that obviously may have some challenges too. So number one, you want to pair with that staff, because when you have challenging students or students, it can be very stressful. So getting in there and really supporting the staff, coming up with a plan and putting procedures in place. But I love being with the staff and the kids. That's kind of the best part of the job. As an administrator, obviously, you're overseeing a facility or a building or a program. And, it's a lot of obviously paperwork, and there's a lot of, compliance, and you're doing a lot of meetings, and those are all critical to being administrator. Yeah. I mean, that's, you can't avoid that. That's what administration is. Like, you have to plan for programming. However, I will say that being in the classrooms, we're on the floor. I have two assistant principals, Jennifer Williams and Aaron Stankner, great assistant principals. And, we kind of just split up and just say, hey, I got this wing, or I got these classrooms, and pop in there periodically to help support, answer questions, but also go in there and provide support as well too for the learners, particularly, in classes that, again, if it's new teacher, new staff, and you see them struggling, drop what you're doing and go in there, help support as best you can, because, it's challenging, and you want the staff to contact reinforcement. If you go in there with the learners and see them that they're doing well, when you're working with them, you restructure some programming and they see the effects of that, they can start carrying it on. It just makes better. So sometimes I had to be in the classroom for a couple of days. No one saw me, but, we got a particular student or a classroom in order, and create some foundational tier 1 practices and some tier 2 practices for the learner to contact reinforcement more frequently, to get stabilized, and I could fade out, and then they can carry it on too. Because sometimes staff just need to see it. They don't want to hear it or go to a standalone presentation. Sometimes they got to see it, and I'm always ready.
Awesome.
So I try to get in there as much as possible for other classrooms. And that's something for me. I'm, still trying to ensure that you try to get as much face time with the staff, even just popping to say hello to them, just to say hi, but get as much face time with the staff. But I'm to answer your question, very sparingly in my office, if I'm in there, because I have to be.
Okay. Yeah. John Austin was on the show several months ago, and he was talking about, the work he does with companies and things like that. And one of the things that he stressed about is, how do you create an environment of psychological safety so staff can give you feedback, or, at the very least voice problems and things like that. So things don't, fester and, get really bad before they come to the surface and whatnot. So, just, and you can speak to this with your prior leadership experience at the other school or in the current setting. You can take it in any direction you want, but in your, in your time as a principal, what are some things that you've done to kind of create those conditions where staff are comfortable sharing, what's going wrong as well as what's going right, or at least create conditions of safety so that you can get the feedback you need to be an effective leader?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, shout out to John Austin. He hit the book Results.
Yes.
Yeah. He gave me when we were at Babbitt together, he gave me.
That's right.
So shout out to John Austin. I appreciate that.
Awesome dude.
Yeah. Awesome dude. Thanks for the free book. I appreciate it. It was read. So awesome work. The biggest thing I think for administration is historically speaking, when you're quote unquote, and I hate using this word, but I'm going to use this word because it's a common terminology, but when your boss walks in on you, it's usually, for most people, it's usually some level of negative reinforcement or they're coming in contact with, oh, why are they in here? That there's something wrong? Am I in trouble? Is something like when your principal, your boss comes in to see you, or you question it, right? Like, why are you in here? Like, you didn't give me the heads up. You're coming for an observation. So kind of dispelling those notions. The more interface you have with them, the more they see you, the more you interact with staff, the more comfortable they're going to be with you. You're pairing with them. So when you're paired with someone, as a reinforcer, they're more likely to engage in some, again, these introverbals where you're going back and forth and having dialogue and conversation where they can come with you and tell you things are going really well and be open and honest about things that are not going well. So the biggest thing is building a level of a relationship with them by going into the classrooms, having a dialogue, telling them things that are going really good. Try to use a 4 or 5-to-1 ratio, high verbal praise the first, anything that they're doing, even if they're not doing really that well, but you see anything, a sliver, anything positive, you make sure you highlight that so they can at least feel comfortable to talk to you. I think that has allowed staff to comfortably and honestly, for the most part, come to me about certain situations that are good. And to your point, that may not be working well. And what can we do to resolve it? Will it be staff on staff conflict? Or maybe there's going to be some other conflict they may have with families, or they may have it with the student, and having that open dialogue, So we try to really emphasize that we have an open door policy, and please come to us sooner rather than later for any kind of issues that we can help resolve. Because I think the biggest thing is, anyone who's listening, if you're any kind of administrative capacity where you kind of oversee, you always want for someone who you work, unfortunately it's called under, but who you work, I say with, whoever you're working with, build a rapport enough that they can feel they can come to you and talk to you openly and honest, and not feel that if they come to you, it's going to be, met with some level of punishment. It has to be something that can feel open. Even if they made a mistake, they can feel transparent enough to say, I made a mistake, where they know the relationship that's been built, that, sometimes if you make a mistake, depending on what the mistake is, it could be a punishment. However, they still feel comfortable to be open and honest about it because the relationship that's been built as well, too.
Got it. Very good. All right. I'm going to ask you something personal.
Okay.
I saw you, in addition to the talk that I mentioned earlier that you did at Babbitt, I also saw you on a panel that was talking about kind of contemporary issues with regard to diversity and behavior analysis, but also diversity in academic settings and things like that. And if I recall correctly, it's been a few months since that time, but I think you had mentioned, and obviously the statistics will bear this out, there's, considerable, disproportionality in special education and kids with emotional behavioral disorders and things like that, not just in terms of people of color, but also boys in particular. Have you, I want to ask you a question about being a role model. You're a super humble guy, and it must be, this might make you uncomfortable, but it must be gratifying to be a leader in those settings. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that something that's dawned on you, or am I making this up in my head, or I don't know?
Not at all.
Okay.
Embarrassed to talk about? Absolutely not. I embrace this conversation. I think it's fantastic that we're having this. Yeah, it feels, for me, it's the natural reinforcer. Families, Black families, how happy they are to see, obviously, a Black principal, going to a school, because obviously there's many, obviously locally, a lot of principals who are non-Black or white, and they may have an experience within their own community with teachers and principals and referral out of schools and law enforcement, the justice system. They may see it as all white. So when they come to an alternative school and see a Black principal, it does make them feel good. I mean, they said it. I mean, I'm not telling you what I think, I'm telling you what was said and how they feel about it. So yeah. And also the students, seeing, a principal they can relate to, feel that they can talk to and build a relationship with, it means the world to them. And I think it's just, that's reinforcing for me to have at least a platform in a position that, you're accepting students or working with students and their families and really helping them out. And not saying that, other people, other administration are not. I'm not insinuating that at all.
No, I'm not getting that. So
yeah,
good.
It's just that when you're in a situation where, unfortunately, you had a situation that was challenging and in the school, and you don't trust a school due to certain things that have occurred in the school, putting into a new school an alternative, which at the time may not have been an option that you even wanted, but you feel more comfortable now because you have a principal that happens to be, Black. So that is very impactful rather. And I'm keen to that, very keen to that. And also, providing a lot of support and garner that. And I welcome that. I want I want any child to feel comfortable. But if we're speaking about, Black and brown children coming to a school and see a Black principal, that means the world too, because we always talk about community mirrors. And having, folks that represent in a position, whether it could be political or educational position of what they call, I'm not calling him, just saying what it's called, authority or position of, power, which I don't use these words, but I'm just saying what's the common terminology that's used. Sure. To be in a position to help people out and people just feel some level of comfort and connected, a level of connectivity and continuity with that means the world. Absolutely. No question.
All right. Thanks for sharing that experience. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. I appreciate you asking.
Awesome, man. Bruce, another fun conversation. I always have such a good time when I chat with you. And I want you to come back and fill us in as you continue to grow this culture in the new setting. And congrats again on the end of the first school year.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. And once again, I appreciate, the opportunity to share the great things we're doing at our school and also at the Child and Career Development Center here at the CCIU, Chester County Intermediate Unit. And just thank you again for, the work you do and the platforms you give folks to share their experience, disseminate the science that we all, whether in our drive or on a vacation to the beach, we can just listen and just hear the great things.
Your poor families.
Hey. It's all good. We dropped a lot of our vacations because I have 4 young children, so we don't fly.
Right.
When everyone is sleeping through the night, I just pop on my podcast, man. I'm cruising, so it's good.
Good stuff. All right, Bruce. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hey there. If you're listening to this, well, you've clearly made it through to the end of the podcast. Congratulations, and I appreciate the time you've invested in listening to this really important conversation with Bruce. If you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, there's a couple of things I would ask you to do that would really, really help spread the message here. One would be to just simply share this episode with friends and colleagues. You can do that on your social media platform of choice or, oh my gosh, even in person at work or whatever. And then also feel free to go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. That would be awesome as well. And then thirdly, I suppose, go to the show notes for this episode and go to Bruce's LinkedIn page and say hello to him and thank him for spending a couple of hours with me and by extension you talking about these really important topics. All right, that's it, and we will see you in the next session of the Behavioral Observations Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.